God dwells in you. Let us pray. Most holy and loving God, giver of all good gifts, we thank you for the gift that you give us when you give us to each other. We thank you for the spaces in between us that you fill with your grace and love. We thank you that you bind us together beyond everything, even death, and are always luring us, leading us, wooing us into a future of spectacular love. We ask that you would open our ears and open our hearts. Help us to speak clearly and listen fearlessly. Help us to hear your voice in our hearts, in the spaces between words, and on the lips of one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. It is wonderful to have everyone here. It is wonderful everyone turn and wave to the camera, to everyone who's watching us streaming or watching us later on YouTube. It is great having everyone here. This is kicking off a fantastic 6 weeks at All Saints Church, a season of wisdom and revelation, and I can't think of anyone better to kick it off with than Lisa Sharon Harper. We got to know each other first in Ferguson and also with her work for Sojourners. And she right now, along with someone who's working for her that we all know, Claudia Shields, is working with our youth and with Jenny Tisi, our youth choir director, helping us design our youth civil rights choir trip that's going to happen this summer. Lisa Sharon has founded an organization called Freedom Road, which really works with congregations specifically on just about every level imaginable to deal with issues of race in ways that are incarnational and transformational. And so she is an author of an incredible book. I encourage you to buy it. Unfortunately, we have copies for sale right over here. It's called The Very Good Gospel. And she'll be also signing copies of that book after the 11:15 service. We got to get her out of here to preach one more time. And it's a phenomenal book. And right now she's going to just spend about 45 minutes with us and talk about, well, what is the very good news about race in the USA? And sometimes it might be hard to believe that there can be some very good news about race in the USA, but she's going to enlighten us about that. And so I'm going to step aside and just let you welcome Lisa Sharon Harper. Thank you.
What is the very good news about race in the USA? That it can be dismantled. Hello, somebody. Woo! Ah! Okay, so let's see how. Let's see how. And before we can actually even go into that, I'm going to go fast because I have like 20 minutes to give you a 45-minute lecture. So I'm going to fly. So take notes. I want you to, get your iPhones out, get your pads out, whatever it is that you write on, and let's go. Race. Race, you've heard this before. It's a construct, right? So if it's a construct, it means it can be deconstructed. It means it's not from God. It means it's from humans, and here's how. So about a couple of millennia ago, in 360 BC, Plato wrote a book. In fact, he did this pontification on how the polis should be living together in his book, The Republic. In, I think, book 8 of The Republic, he stated, one of the first things I could find about race, he said, race is this thing that it's when different people groups are made of different metals. I kid you not, this was his definition of race. They're made of different metals. Some people are made of gold, others are made of silver, others copper, others iron, and whatever metal they are made of determines how those people will serve the republic. So from the very beginning, the concept, the construct of race was created by humans in order to delineate what people groups would serve society in what ways. Now, the thing about Plato's understanding of race was that it wasn't necessarily hierarchical, and it also wasn't necessarily hierarchical the way that you would think. So, the people who were made of gold actually weren't on the top, because gold wasn't the biggest commodity back then. It wasn't like the big thing. Bronze was the big thing, And then there was the Iron Age. So these were the things like, so people were made of iron were like, whoa, you know? So that was Plato. That's the foundation of our Western understanding of the concept called race. Some people might say, well, isn't race in the Bible? No. Ethnicity is in the Bible. In fact, let's actually go through quickly and define our terms. Because when we talk about race, ethnicity, culture, and nationality, we're talking about 4 separate and different things. Race is that what? Construct, right? It's man-made. Ethnicity is what we see in the Bible. We see ethnos, people groups. People groups. These are groups of people who travel through time and space and are shaped by their experience together on land in particular eras of time, over time, and that becomes an ethnic group. So Irish American is different than Irish ethnic group. Hello? Right? It's a different ethnic group because they have had different experience over long swaths of time, have been shaped differently. My parents, my mom and my stepdad went to Ireland like a couple of decades ago, actually, and they were walking around, these 2 black people in an all-Irish area. I think it was Dublin. They were in Dublin, and they're walking around, and they had people stopping them on the streets, you know, top of the morning to you, you know, and also, hey, can I help you? You know, is there anything that we can, is anything that you want, anything we can get, or you know, can we make your visit even better? Mary J. Blige was everywhere in Ireland, literally in every store window. They loved her. Would this be the experience in South Boston? No, because of the different history that has shaped the people group called Irish American on American soil for the last couple of centuries. So 2 different ethnic groups, same thing with African American and Caribbean American, or any different African country, different ethnic groups, because we've had different histories that have shaped our view of the world. Got it? Okay, so now ethnicity is dynamic. Race is static because it's given to you by the government. The government tells you what race you are, right? So ethnicity is dynamic. It actually is, it's not just given to you. It changes over long swaths of time as people change, right? As they have common experience together. Culture is fluid. Culture is actually more than anything else determined by the land that you live on. So the land, I'm going to go back to the, oh no, we're in the right slide. So culture is determined by the land, by the landscape, by the land. What foods you eat comes from the land. How you build comes from the land, right? Like whether you build with wood or stone comes from the land. The music that you make, it's determined by the instruments you can make because of what is on the land. So drums were big in Africa because there's a lot of wood, right? You had huts as opposed to stone buildings because you had a lot of wood as opposed to stone, right? So that's culture. And it's so fluid that, you know how you hear like black culture? Well, there is kind of a meta-narrative because of our common history and the culture of the South, the land of the South, and the foods that were created and the ways that we lived in the South based on what we had to build with, right? That's what, and also because of the oppression, the cultures of oppression that grow out of the land and how we're able to use materials. So in some ways there is a common black culture, but not really, because I'll tell you, it's a very, very different thing to have African-American culture in San Diego from African-American culture in Philly. Hello, somebody, yo, 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 right? Right, so, or African-American culture in the heart of Georgia, in rural Georgia. They're different, it's different. Even different foods. If you go to the African American Museum, the National African American Museum, and you go to, which you have to do, that's a pilgrimage site to everybody. For the rest of your life, you must go, right? Once a year, okay? I'm going to just say that right now. But if you go, what you're going to see in their cafeteria is that they have different like counters that you can go up to and get different foods that were created in different regions by African Americans all over the country, right? So that's culture, different, because the culture is determined by the land. Got it? Nationality is simple. It's what passport do you have in your pocket? It's really literally who claims you as a citizen and what nation do you claim as a citizen. You got it? So race, static, ethnicity, dynamic, culture, fluid, nationality, well, it's also kind of fluid. You can change your nationality as you go. So defining those terms, what we're talking about now is race. Got it? So Plato had that pontification about race, and race was created for one purpose, to determine how different people groups would serve the republic. Then you get the hierarchy of human being that begins to surface, and it surfaces actually before the Pope. I think it's Pope, blanking, and actually this is, I don't have, here you go. Oh, here we go. We can put that on that one. So Pope Nicholas V, right? So Pope Nicholas V has an explorer come up to him, and that explorer says to him, yo, 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 Pope. Notice, you can tell I'm from Philly, right? So there you go. That was like, I spent most of my childhood there. So, yo, 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 Pope, we want to go exploring and I need a blessing. And the Pope says to him, hey, I'll give you a blessing and I'll do you one better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the ability to, when you come across a culture, a nation, an ethnicity, a people group that is not civilized, then you have the right to claim their land and enslave them. And that's in 1452. 1452, Pope Nicholas V says this. And now why did he do that? He did that because of a bad reading of Genesis 1. Hello, what we just talked about. Genesis 1:26, because what he thought and what the common thought was, well, only the civilized are called to exercise dominion in the world. Hello, somebody. And then they defined who civilized was. Civilized, you know, and they didn't really necessarily, I don't know, maybe they did write it down. I haven't found that. But we all know, it's kind of like, we just have like this understanding. Civilized is people who build with stone. Civilized is people who dance through space, not in space. Right? Right? So civilized is people who don't tell the truth. Hello, somebody. As opposed to those who tell you like it is. Right? So these are the things, these were the markers. So when that explorer went exploring and he came across some people who built with wood and not stone, and he came across some people who danced in space and not, you know, they claimed their land and enslaved them. And then you go a couple of hundred years later, that's 1452. That's, by the way, that's called the doctrine of discovery. Now we call it the doctrine of discovery. And it creates the legal foundations for, it's the reason why we have actually the United States, actually North, Central, and South America, all of colonized Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, all of I already said South America, basically the world as we know it today. You flash forward a couple of hundred years, and, oh, no, okay, this is what you were saying, right? So here, let's see if we can do this. Let's go back here. There we go. Ha-ha. So, I got it, see? So then we get Linnaeus. Now, Linnaeus was a botanist, right? So this is actually now the year 1746. Linnaeus was a botanist. Anybody here remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species? Hello! That's 7th grade science right there. I remember that. That's Mr. Williams. He was really good. So I pride myself in learning, actually, still remembering that. But he's the guy who he kind of discovered that, right? And he's really well known for this. He's not the only person who was doing this, but he's kind of the most notable. When he got an idea, he said, hey, he wrote this book called Systema Naturae, and in it he actually, you know, did the kingdom, phylum, class, genus, order, family, species. I know I got that wrong, but whatever. And so then he said, hey, this works with fauna, maybe it works with humanity. Let's try it. So who did he put on top? People like him. Exactly, exactly. And so he put what now this was his scientific classification. White Europeanus is on top. Who is after white Europeanus, would you imagine? Red Americanus. That came next. I know, I wouldn't have thought that, but it was. That's what I saw the paper. There it is. Well, who's after that? Yellow Asiatus. And then who's after that? Black Africanus is on the bottom. Now, it only took 41 years to go from that scientific classification, which was bad science and actually gives us the scientific foundations for the bell curve, right? Right? It only took 40 years, though, 41 years to go from that to the 3/5 compromise. The 3/5 compromise. Where in 1787, our Congress, our first Congress, actually declared, or among the first, declared that people of African descent who were enslaved would be counted as 3/5 of a human being. Now, lest you think that that was the Southerners' sin, the North didn't want to count them as human at all. So that was the compromise. Because to count people of African descent would give the Southern people more representation in Congress. So the 3/5 compromise was actually, in my book, the first gerrymandered system in America. It was the first gerrymandering of districts because it counted, ironically, right? Didn't we just have a war, about taxation without representation? It counted people who were enslaved who had no vote in order to increase the number of votes that the white Southern representatives had in Congress. And then for the rest of, in 1790, 3 years later, so that was 1786, 1790, you get the first census. And in the first census, is only one race listed, white. It's only one. So I love it when white folks say, well, we don't have a race. Hello. Yes, actually, all the other races revolve around you. The creation of, and in all of the years from 1790 to present, I actually did this research. From 1790 to present, the only racial categorization that has not changed is white. Why? Why do you think that is? Because now, like on the first census, there was only one race. It was white and then slave and then other. But now when you look, there's over 50 races, right? There's a disaggregation of all of these racial categorizations, but yet they're still white. And white folks claim Latinos too. They took some of them. You got some white Hispanic and non-white Hispanic. Come on, what is that? What is that? That is about power. That is about numbers. That is about majority rule. That is about domination. That's what that's about. And in the same year, in 1790, that Congress instituted the Immigration Act of 1790, and you know what it said? It said the only people who would be able to become naturalized citizens in the United States would be white men of good character, which basically meant Christian. So what does that mean? What does that look like then? It caused the next century, you had immigrants coming into the United States. Immigrants, some of them living here and then being brought into the United States, like folks in California, hello somebody, who are not immigrants. They were the original people here. Hello, Latinos here. Hello somebody. And yet, they had to figure out where they fell on that racial hierarchy that was created on the East Coast, right? In Congress. Are they white? Are they black? Or are they somewhere in between? And so you had immigrants who came into the United States literally fighting their way all the way up to the Supreme Court, all the way through the 1920s. And a friend of mine said the 1940s, though I couldn't find that. I know I found the last case that I could find was 1924, I believe, where you had a Japanese man fighting all the way up to the Supreme Court to say, I am Caucasian, I am white. And they said, no, you're not. Go back down there where you belong. Why would people do that? I mean, the Greeks had to prove they were white. The Germans had to prove they were white. The Irish had to prove they were white. Ben Franklin, you can Google this and find it. It's that simple to find. But Ben Franklin, about 10 years, I think it's about 10 years before the Three-Fifths Compromise, or 20 years before the Three-Fifths Compromise, he argued to the Crown, back before the Revolutionary War, he argued to the Crown that the U.S. should be a colony separate, specifically to maintain and protect the domination of the white race, because the white race was actually not growing as fast as the rest of people of color all over the rest of the world. So we needed to make this land, this colony, a white colony. He argued for that, and guess what? He won that argument in 1787 and 1790. And so that's where the racial hierarchy began in the United States. Now I'm going to move this up and see if I can do that. So let me ask you this. What is the impact? What would be the impact of seeing this for 300 years, 254 years to be exact, and seeing that, seeing this. This is what people lived in. They lived walking down the street, seeing this, and this, and this. What would be the psychological impact? And this. And then after the Civil War, they created systems in order to maintain that supremacy of whiteness called peonage, where they literally lowered the bar of criminality. And I'm realizing, I'm going a little bit over my time here. So, I mean, we still have time, but we won't have as much time for Q&A. But I'll try to speed it up. They lowered the bar of criminality so that they could maintain the plantations that they had free labor on, and the only way they could do that was through the 13th Amendment, which gave that out. It said slavery is illegal in the United States except in the case of imprisonment. So by the year, I think it was the years like 1890, Alabama, like 90% of Alabama's GDP was brought in through its prison system. And that was because of peonage, because they created laws like if you sit on a park bench too long, you can be swept up and put in prison. I kid you not. And this, more than 4,000 people lynched between 1877 and 1950, according to EJI, Equal Justice Initiative. And this, and this. Now, the thing that struck me was that when you think about the images you just saw, they're very similar to the images that Europeans would have seen of the people who were placed here, of actual criminals in Europe. That's what they did to criminals. They put them in work camps. That's what prisons looked like in Europe. They were work camps. They gave them trials that then led to executions by hanging. So criminals were hung in Europe. Criminals were put to work in Europe. Criminals had, this was literally a work camp. They had overseers over them. So what would be the psychological impact of living for 346 years now with slavery and then the nearly 100 years of Jim Crow, of seeing and walking in that? It's explicit and implicit bias. We begin to think that people of African descent are inherently criminal. That's why in Ferguson, when the officer said that Michael Brown was a monster, the black folks went, "What?" We knew what that was. That was implicit bias at work. Now, what is implicit and explicit? Implicit bias is really unconscious bias. In fact, studies show that 75% of all people in the world who have tested, who've done the test, there's an online test for this that Harvard developed, 75% of people test positive for implicit, unconscious bias toward whiteness. That's the impact of colonization, y'all. It's everywhere. Now, what is it? Implicit bias is not inherently bad in itself, and implicit bias is really associations that we make, right? I mean, it's the thing that shortens our thinking processes so that we don't have to have long thinking processes to figure what something is. Instead of saying, oh, that has a back and a seat and 4 legs, that is a chair. Instead, we look and we go, chair, right? Well, that's what we have done. That's why we do it in gender, we do it in race, we do it in nationality, we do it in all kinds of ways. Sexual orientation, gender identification, we do it in all kinds of ways. We make associations that speed up our thinking processes. But there's bias in our thinking processes that we have to see. And this is the thing. So explicit is when it's expressed directly, when we're aware of it. We are conscious of the bias. That's the KKK, right? Like, that's the skinheads. You know, that's what we found and what I was up against with all the other pastors who were in Charlottesville, right? So that's what we find there. But implicit bias is what we find when we're on a bus and we decide not to sit next to somebody who is darker, right? Or when it's what we find in the workplace, when women don't get as much pay, or they don't get advanced as quickly, or women of color especially. Hello, somebody, right? Or it's what happens when police officers stop. Just stop, folks, just because they look criminal, right? They look like something must be wrong here because you have a black man driving a Lexus. Ooh, that shouldn't be, right? So these are the associations that we make. We've been taught to make. So the outcome is that systems and structures are shaped by implicit and explicit bias in our nation, and systems and structures reinforce implicit and explicit bias, and implicit bias creates systems and structures with disparate outcomes in our society. You got it? Okay. So that's what Black Lives Matter is about. So when that hashtag first hit the airwaves, and you started to see it after Michael Brown and the resistance movement that rose up against that, and you had Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi and Alicia Garza began to push out this hashtag Black Lives Matter. Do you know what they were saying? What they were saying is Black Lives Matter too. What they were saying, what they were really doing is they were identifying a truth that exposed the lie that we all believe. And the clearest manifestation of that lie in that moment was the flow of hashtags that were coming across. Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, John Crawford, S.L. Ford, all in 1 month. 1 month. There was resistance. This is one of those things. Just put that up there gratuitously. Sorry. There you go. So this is Ferguson. This is Ferguson. This was 1 month, literally 1 month after Michael Brown died. So in that year, 2015, the Washington Post and several other organizations began to do some charting of the data because nobody had been doing it before. And what they found was that in that year, 782 people were shot dead by police. 74 of the dead were unarmed. Of those 74, 28 of them were black men. So about 40% of the unarmed victims were black men. But black men only make up 6% of the entire population. this is a manifestation of implicit bias at work in policing. And why am I focusing on policing? I'm focusing there because it has been the clearest manifestation of the bias that has shaped our systems, and not just the policing, the whole judicial system. Because the next year, we realized we actually saw a lot of these officers who were indicted, came to trial, and were let off by the juries. So the world was built by bias, and one of the manifestations of that is the reality that 1.5 million black men are missing from our communities right now. For every 100 black women in our communities, there are only 87 black men. Why is that? They say that the highest reasons, the biggest reasons, are because of imprisonment, because of the lowering of the bar of criminality on marijuana. Hello, somebody. We just had a hello, somebody. Seriously, right? Just last week, I think it was a couple of days ago, that our number 45 said that he was going to prioritize marijuana again. Well, what is that? It's a promise to make America white again. And then when he was in office, he instituted the 21st century task force on policing, and that task force, which was made up of officers from across the country, as well as advocates and people who had an interest in this, they knew we know how our system is broken. Let's fix it. They recommended these 6 things. We need to build trust and legitimacy between the police and these communities, our communities. We need to create police oversight, which does not exist right now in most municipalities. Technology and social media need to be leveraged. We need community policing and crime reduction and training and education and officer wellness and safety, because, folks, trauma happens when you are out on that street. When you are encountering evil on a regular basis, you yourself, your soul gets twisted. The image of God in you gets twisted. It needs to be untwisted. We need to care for the officers as much as we are caring for anybody else, because that's what Shalom does. It cares for all. Now, the 2 that I want to focus on are the first pillar, the support, adoption of procedures that build trust and legitimacy. I know that even right here in Pasadena, there's been issues. And this church has actually been on the forefront, creating space for people of faith to come and resist the structures that implicit bias built. I want to encourage you in that. And one of the ways that I found in order to begin to build that trust is through an actual program that was developed by Everyday Democracy. So I want to commend that to you, that if you come together over a period of 6 weeks, Everyday Democracy has created this program that I used in the South Bronx, where I brought together after a man was shot 51 times on the night before his wedding. A black man, no joke, and he did nothing. We began to build that relationship. And so Everyday Democracy has created this thing where people come together over 6 weeks, and the community with the police begins to figure out what the actual problems are. They begin to hear each other's stories. They begin to know each other and see each other as human and begin to work the problem together. The second thing I want to commend to you is this community policing and crime reduction. In the midst of that, what we called conversations for change between the police and the community, we discovered that in New York, the community policing, which used to be, had been ended. And what the police said is that now what we're doing is we're patrolling by car, and we don't know the community. Because we don't know the community, grandma is as much the enemy as somebody else. So community policing actually gives the opportunity for police officers to know the community, to know the people, to see the people as made in the image of God, and to actually target based on actions, not profiles. So there's a lot of other stuff, and I'll go quickly here. Matthew 25, if you go to the Matthew25pledge.com, you'll actually see an opportunity for your church to join a larger national movement of people who are making a very simple pledge. I will protect the vulnerable in these times. Period. That's the pledge. And one of the ways we can do that is by protecting the vulnerable who are vulnerable to being targeted by police because of implicit bias. You got it? And explicit bias. Hello, somebody. And then take the Harvard Implicit Association test. If you haven't taken it, everybody here needs to take it by tonight. That is your homework. Because you cannot move forward until you know. Right? Until you know. You can't heal before you've been diagnosed. Hello, somebody, right? You know, you got to go to the doctor. This is the doctor right here to get the diagnosis, to know how deeply inbred is the implicit bias in you. And what they actually say is, you can't do organizing without first organizing yourself. So this is the first way to organize the self here in this topic. And then do what Paul said to do. Take every thought captive. When you start seeing, when you're in the lift, and I'm not even doing Uber no more, so hello somebody, but when you're in your lift and you begin to think of that lift driver as having been created to ride you around, take that thought captive. And then ask them, especially if they're from another country, which often they are, what did you do? Well, first of all, how did you come here? What did you do in your homeland? I'll tell you what, in DC, most of my Lyft drivers are from Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and they were engineers in their homeland, or lawyers, but their credential wouldn't translate, and they didn't have the money, so now they're driving. That's common. And then immersion, what they say, and the science actually says that as much as you can actually walk in the feet, in the footpaths, in the footsteps of others, as much as you can grow your capacity for empathy, then you will actually, your implicit bias score will go down. Like literally, they've seen that now. So immersion, sociologists say, is the best way. So those pilgrimages you guys do, as much as you can do them in the U.S., I don't think there's anything more powerful than an immersive experience in the community of the other, because then you see it, you hear the worldview from a surround sound. And then finally, grow empathy and walk in humility, knowing that you are not God, God is God, and God has declared that all humanity is made in God's image. Amen. We don't really have time for questions, do we? Maybe one question? Okay, somebody. Oh, good. Okay, so one question, and really, don't be shy, anybody. Shoot your hand up, go for it. Anyone? Okay, over here.
One of the items in your need list was a need for teaching how to have conversation in encounters.
Yes.
How can that be done?
The conversation, so what you're talking about here? Which one are you talking about? Oh, this one and this one. So okay, I get it. Or here. Yeah, so the way that we did it, I mean, oh, I see. Okay, so giving individuals voice during encounters. So, thank you so much for that. So, for example, let's just take Michael Brown, for example, right? So he's walking down the street, and the officer comes up next to him in the car and yells from the car. Can I cuss? Go ahead. Because this is what he said. Get the fuck off the street! That was the first interaction between Michael Brown and the officer who killed him. So what would it look like to do that right? Let's just think about that for a minute. I mean, really, we could have a conversation about that. So, I mean, and giving voice, it could be he pulls over. If he really cares that they're walking in the street, he walks up to them and he says, "Hey, gentlemen, You know, how's it going today? How's your day? Gets a conversation. You know, hey, you know, I know I don't have a whole lot of time. I want you to know, walking in the street is dangerous. I want to make sure, and you know, people can't see you when you're coming through. So can you just walk on the sidewalk here? That's the law, but that's also just safe for you. Do you know, just less than an hour before that interaction, Michael Brown was talking to a man who was a gardener, talking to that man about Jesus, because Michael Brown had just discovered Jesus. And he told that man who was really down, don't worry, Jesus has got your back. And he said to that man, I'll be back. We can finish this conversation in a minute. I have to go down to the store. So if he saw Michael Brown as a human being and interacted with him as a human being, himself as a human being, to human being, that's how that's done.
Can it be done in police training?
Can it? Yes, it can. And in fact, it is done in some police training. But I'll tell you what, it's not done enough. It's not done enough. So yes. Yeah. Anybody? We're at 11. We're at 11. So thank you guys.